Hey folks, happy Friday to you. Really brief lecture. Figured it is better to be able to do this at your own pace than stick around on Zoom today, just because I know that there's lots of technical issues happening, especially in the Oakville area with regards to Cogeco connections and Rogers connections. So hopefully you're able to get this, and the PDF, or rather the PowerPoint, is posted on our Etsy page should you need it. But Canada has been known as a peacekeeping country, and it is something that I think we are very proud of as a nation. And it is something, even for myself, when I've traveled, being known as a Canadian has this attachment to it. So we have this very positive image around the world in regards to dealing with conflict. And as a nation, we've been involved in a ton of different peacekeeping missions. And our effort has helped resolve conflict and save lives. And we are super well renowned for that. Now, following World War II, we actually had the third largest navy in the world, and we actually gained power or gained status as a middle power. So we're not the best, but we're also not the worst of the worst when it comes to our military. And during the 1960s, which I know we skipped over, under Lester B. Pearson, Canada really restructured its military, the idea of building up our reserves as well as a standing military. And the Navy, Army, and Air Force were all combined into one defense force under a central command. And for those of you who are interested in military history, this was very, very good for us because it meant that there was better flow of money, better flow of resources, and just better command and understanding over all forces. Now, eventually Pearson passes to Trudeau, and Trudeau continued this trend towards peacekeeping rather than military strength. And in the early 1970s, Trudeau made multiple changes. First of all, he withdrew 50% of our troops from NATO commitments in Europe, which means we're not as invested in what's going on over there. There is a funding freeze, so as much as I'm talking about like the idea of flowing resources, doesn't mean that there's going to be a ton of extra money. And he decreased armed forces from 110,000 in our standing military to 80,000. And we decided, if you remember all the way back to before the Christmas break, that we were not going to allow nuclear missiles, aka the bomb marks, on Canadian soil. He also insisted that there be greater French-Canadian presence in the armed force, and he is the one who breaks out and establishes diplomatic ties with Communist China and Cuba. Now, there's a lot of controversy around this, much like there's a lot of controversy around our current prime minister, as he met with guys like Mao Zedong and Fidel Castro. And, there's multiple different meetings between these individuals as he tried to open up both of these countries' borders and set up trade kind of relationships with these guys during the Cold War era. Now, since the 1960s, Canada has used its armed forces in a number of United Nations peacekeeping missions, and we've participated in more peacekeeping missions than any other nation. In terms of some of the ones that we've been part of, these are lists from these are some of the most current ones during our decade study, if you will. There's a ton that you can look into. The Rwandan genocide, what happened in Nicaragua a couple of years back, what happened in Cyprus, Afghanistan, Yom Kippur War of 1973, Indochina, and Kashmir region from 1949 to 1979. For me, I know I'm most familiar with what happened with the Rwandan genocide. There's some really good movies about that. Shaking Hands with the Devil is one of them. There's also Hotel Rwanda. But just crazy to look at. And so one of the things when we talk about the Holocaust is we're like, oh man, this mass genocide of people. Understand that as devastating as the Holocaust was, it is not a standalone. There have been multiple times within our history as people that you have seen genocide happen. Now, in 1992, Canadian troops did take part in the UN mission to stop the civil war in Somalia. They weren't able to stop the war, but provided necessary aid to those in need. The mission also put a black mark on Canadian armed forces after Somalian was tortured and killed by several Canadian soldiers, and this became known as the Somalian Affair. So we don't always have this pure kind of thing, again, the pedestal that we put ourselves on, the pedestal that I put myself on. So we do have some cases that need to be addressed. In terms of some of the more recent missions, and we say recent as in within the past 30, 40 years, you do have what happened in Kuwait. The UN authorized the use of military force to remove Iraqi troops from after Hussein refused to comply. And we supplied 4,500 troops to participate in air attacks and controlled nearby shipping lanes. You also have what happened in Yugoslavia. After the fall of communism in the USSR, fighting breaks out in 1991 between the Serbs, the Croats, and the Bosnians. This is the Serbs and Croats, and the Muslim community. Now, Canadian troops supported the NATO-led force, and Canadians would also help in NATO-led attacks on Yugoslavia in 1999 after the Serbs invaded Kosovo and committed genocide. Again, this is going to come up a couple of times. We also have what happened in Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks. Following the terrorist attack of 9/11, Canadian forces took part in NATO. The NATO invasion of Afghanistan to root out al-Qaeda and the Taliban government. This was not, interestingly enough, a United Nations sponsored mission, but really for us, it was our tie to our American allies at the time and why we go in. Now, Canada continues to be known for its peacekeeping status, and recent funding increase have given Canadian forces increased ability to help provide help in areas of need. So Haiti and the Philippines, in recent years, the massive natural disasters and stuff that have happened. I have had the privilege of working with a mother of a King's family who goes back to Haiti every year to go and help just love on this community, to bring girls into education, to bring education, period. And it's just a very powerful thing. And she's so proud to be part of the Canadian peacekeeping missions there. So understand, again, I mentioned to you that one of our biggest peacekeeping missions was the Suez Canal crisis. Now, for the sake of time, I don't really have the opportunity to go over it. I know one student who is listening to this in particular is going to be frustrated that I am not going over it. But understand that we had set a name for ourselves as peacekeepers way back when that event happens, and it's tied to our need for Canadian flag. So this is something that I hope that we continue to be known as, but that's not a guaranteed truth for us. But hopefully this lecture is helpful for you. You, again, are well loved, and I will hopefully see you in a couple days' time. Okay? Be well, guys.